Good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another great session today. So we have Timothy back. He's presented to us before, so welcome back, Timothy. Your session on feature flags and configuration management using Azure App Config for .NET apps today. So really looking forward to it. Thank you for donating your time and your knowledge to us again today. So I've just got a few sort of housekeeping to go through. So this session is delivered as part of the Azure Cloud Commanders Skilling Room. So within the Microsoft Tech Community Skilling Hub. So if you go to Tech Community, go to Skilling Hubs, navigate down to Skilling Room directory, you can see a whole bunch of community-led groups, including my one, which is the Azure Cloud Commanders. So we've got groups and for different multiple languages. We've got groups that are focused primarily on AI or Azure or Power Platform and data. So there's different functional sort of skilling groups. Mine is just anything really to do with Azure. Let's come in, start a discussion, ask a question. Yeah, take advantage of some of these awesome sessions being read, being led, and yeah, hopefully just have fun and learn something. So before we get into the session, this is an inclusive session, so just be welcoming and respectful. Feel free to ask questions. Just be mindful that anything that you do post in comments, for example, will be publicly available. Like if you're on YouTube and you post a comment, so if you like say something that may be personal or company related, just make sure you are aware that other people will be able to see that information as well. Yeah, I'll be monitoring the chat throughout. So thank you very much again, Timothy, for coming and presenting on app config today. I'll switch screens, but over to you. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone, welcome once again. It's good to be back here. And yeah, today we'll be talking about a very important service that I've been testing on Azure. And one thing I've learned about the service is makes life easier. So it's about the feature flag and configuration management using Azure App Configuration for .NET apps. A little bit of introduction about me. My name is Timothy Ugwememo. I'm a cloud and DevOps engineer. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. And on the side, I manage a community where we're trying to make tech accessible to everybody in Nigeria that's unable to access tech and unable to use tech in Nigeria. And also on the side, I help with a little bit of scholarship fund for Old School Africa to get people to get trained in tech and to get into tech basically. So that's a little bit of introduction about me. And today we'll be talking about app configuration, Azure app configuration. And basically, it was a very nice feature for Microsoft to bring in because there was a little bit of challenge with managing some things, managing configuration in Azure and in your .NET applications. But Microsoft decided to create a service, which is one thing Microsoft Azure is good at, making things easier for you in your cloud environment and your cloud ecosystem. So that led to the birth of Azure app configuration. So what is the challenge basically for modern .NET apps when it comes to flexibility, releasing new features, changing configuration on the fly without redeployments, and managing your maintenance window and even doing a little bit of hotfix release to your customers, to your users. Most times when you want to do this thing, if you deploy your .NET app on an app service, most times you have to restart the app service, and that's a little bit of downtime, which doesn't give your business good reputation with customer because there might be something important that you need to make the change during business hours. You don't want to restart your application during business hours. That will affect the reputation of your service and also affect user experience. So that was one of the major challenge with redeployment. And also these days, developers, DevOps engineers, people that work with .NET apps get to keep their secrets, their settings, their configuration settings, their keys, their API keys in GitHub or whatever source code management the developers are using. Most times they get to push this thing into that source code repository, and like I've always said, anything that goes into GitHub is there forever. You can always do Git history to get back to what it is. So even if you put the secret there and you decide to remove it later, it's already your Git history. So that was also a challenge in doing those things in your .NET environment. And also sometimes there could be hard-coded values that you put in your application just so that you can make those features available in the immediate runtime environment of the application. Those were the modern major challenges .NET developers face, and which, like I said, led to the birth of a fantastic service called Azure App Configuration. So it's more of a complementary service when you're developing your application in your .NET in your app service, or you're developing it in the function app, or you haven't deployed it to a VM virtual machine. It is more of a complementary service that you can attach to that your deployment. So it helps you to solve configuration issues, help you with feature management in case you don't want to put your secrets in your source code, like I said, or you don't even want to put it in your .env file, or you don't want to put it in the runtime environment of the application, or you don't want your secrets to be living on the same host with your application. That is where the Azure App Configuration comes in. And it's a centralized, a managed service. It is it's an offering given by Azure as a managed service. And it is very, very good for application settings if you have to manage your feature flag, like I said. And also, there are some environment specific configurations that you can just centralize in your Azure App Configuration. You don't need to start creating different settings file. Usually, you see .NET developers, they create app settings.json, app settings.development.json, app settings.local. Those are different files, and most times they are not easy to manage. But with your Azure App Configuration, you can keep everything in a file, and you can use labels. There's something called labels, and there's an hierarchical naming that you can give to it to separate either your dev or your local or your prod environment in your Azure App Configuration. So what we'll cover today, we'll cover how to use Azure App Configuration for feature flag management, for centralized configuration. I'll show you a little bit of how to put it in your .NET Core app, how you can integrate it. And interestingly, we'll test the dynamic refresh. You want to refresh your configuration on the fly, you can do that, and you see how it gets to populate in your application immediately. So we'll be doing that in the demo, and it's going to be a very interesting demo. So what are feature flags? Feature flags are something you use to control the behavior of your application. From the name, it's a feature and it uses a flag. Most times your flags are on a true or false mode. It's always a binary data that you can turn on and turn off, which is very easy to manage when it comes to your Azure App Configuration. So for example, I always use this example. You want to make a change. You want to change your dashboard, which is something we're going to test in the demo. You want to change the dashboard. You want to release the dashboard to your users, and you don't know how users are going to take it. Usually you have to probably redeploy your application, and if users' experience are not okay, that means you need to trigger another redeployment. Now, with the help of the feature flag, you can just turn it on and off, and instantly you see your application picking it up. If I turn on the dashboard, let's say I turn dark mode, I want to see how dark mode works. I turn on dark mode and somebody complains, I can easily turn it off in my production environment. And in less than seconds, without redeploying, without restarting your application, you see these features affecting your application. So it helps with safe rollouts, where perhaps you want to roll out a particular feature to some users in a particular region, or to some users based on a particular criteria that you've set. You can use feature flags for safe rollout. Also for canary release, you want to, like I said, some users in a particular region, you want to see the experience of the app. So you can use the feature flag to turn it on. So it says in your application, you definitely call the feature flag and say, okay, if this user is coming from, let's say, East US, this feature flag should take place. If this user is coming from Canada Central, this feature flag should do this. So it helps you with canary release and also for experimentation, right? You want to experiment in a production environment. You don't want to release it to a subset of users. Perhaps you have your beta testers that you've acquired. You acquired your beta testers and you want your beta testers to test in your production environment. You can use the feature flag to do experimentation in your production environment. So, how does it work with .NET? How do you use it? There is a NuGet package that Microsoft has created, which has most of these features in it, which has most of this function and most of these methods you can call. It is the Microsoft does feature management NuGet package. Once you download it and you attach it to your app, you can use the interface iFeature Manager to get it to access the classes in it, to access the method in that package. So also, like I said, I'll be showing you how you can do this in a very real life environment. And on the right side of the screen, it's an example of your program.cs file. And now you can use the iFeature Manager to actually get features from your Azure App Configuration. That is not the entire configuration. That is not the entire way you have to define it. To get to see that in one of the demos. So it acts as like one reason why you want to use Azure App Configuration is you can centralize your configuration, you can centralize your features, and it helps you to have a single source of truth. You have just one place that all your configuration are. Perhaps you have, let's say, 50 services, 50 applications running in your infrastructure estate or running in your Azure environment. You can have just one app configuration. You don't need to deploy multiple app configuration. Just one app configuration is enough for you to access your configuration file. And like Microsoft will do for a lot of managed services, they are available over the internet. There's a URL that you can call to access the Azure App Configuration. We will get to see that Microsoft creates that URL. It is available worldwide. So that means it's a global resource. That means you can just deploy it, then call it via the endpoint. It's not something that is limited to your Azure environment. You can use the endpoint to access the credentials or to access your configuration. So you have your development, you have your staging, and you have your production. How do you separate this in Azure App Configuration? Like I said, there's something called labels. So you can use your labels to separate this configuration and these keys, these values in your app configuration. You could have, let's say, API key dot dev is this, API key dot staging is this, or API key dot prod is this. Or perhaps you could turn it the other way around. You say dev dot API key is this, prod dot API key is this, and staging dot API key is this. So by the time you are starting up your application, you can use the label filter to get just the configuration settings for your production environment. You don't need to retrieve all the keys in your app configuration before you start filtering in your application. You can use the label to just select the specific ones that you need in your application. And most times, you don't need to do any config change, and you don't need to worry about maintaining variable pipeline. And traditionally, before, probably in your Azure DevOps or maybe GitHub pipeline, you probably don't want, maybe you don't want to expose your secrets, and you try to find a way. You could be using rotating keys. There's an action called rotate keys that you can use to rotate keys and pass values into your app settings.json. You don't need to worry about all those things. Once you have your single centralized source of truth, which is the Azure App Configuration, just reference it in the application and you get all your configuration keys and files. Now, perhaps maybe you have managed identities. You can use managed identities to even reach out to access the Azure App Configuration. You don't want it to be available over the internet. You want to limit it to just your Azure infrastructure. You don't want anybody to reach to, perhaps you're not running an hybrid environment where you have an on-prem and you have your cloud service. Everything is just running in your cloud environment, and you don't want people to access that Azure App Configuration outside your cloud environment, more like a local network within your Azure environment, you can use the manage identities to access this Azure App Configuration and to retrieve your keys within your application itself. And like Microsoft, we always say whenever you're deploying any Azure service, always best to use manage identities so that you can properly manage your role and you can properly manage access to those services by just using RBAC. So now you can also use the options pattern to access the configuration. By the time you're building, usually maybe you are setting your configuration in your .NET app, you are using the builder.service to access all your service or even to register your service in your application. So you can use that config binding options to even access your keys and also to pass the values that you must have retrieved into your application. You know, when you're registering services, when you're registering your configuration, that means you're retrieving these keys. But somewhere down the line in your application, somewhere down the line in whatever method, in whatever class you have, in whatever function you have in your application, you might want to access that config file. So that is where you use the options, the config binding with options to access those values in your application. So now you might be wondering, okay, so if I deploy it, how does my application knows that perhaps something has changed? Maybe I changed a key in my config file. How will my application know that something has changed in my config file to retrieve the new value? That is where the sentinel key comes in. So by the time you're deploying your app config, there's something you should always add to it, which is the sentinel key. So by the time you add your sentinel key, what the application does is that it monitors the sentinel key. If there is an update on the sentinel key, it knows that, okay, now I need to retrieve all the new values back into my application. So that is where the dynamic refresh comes in. You use the sentinel key to trigger a refresh in your application without restarting the application. Now, the sentinel key also, there is a cache expiry time. You don't want to be checking your sentinel key every single time. That is going to cause a little bit of overhead in your application. You could probably set it to like 30 seconds or 5 seconds or maybe 1 minute, depending on your risk appetite and your change appetite to configuration changes. You can set that cache expiry to 30 seconds so that after 30 seconds, if there is no change, there's no expiry. So what it does is you create 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, it checks for the sentinel key. Is there a change on the sentinel key? No, it leaves it. So, but if there's a change of the sentinel key, it retrieves the new configuration, stores it in a cache, waits for another 30 seconds to check the sentinel key. So that is where the cache expiry works. So once there's a change has been detected, that is when something has changed on the sentinel key, then the full configuration is reloaded into your application. So you can reload as much time as you want. You can reload as many changes you want into your application without restarting the application. That is one of the coolest features of the Azure App Configuration. So in the real world scenario, you define a feature flag in your app configuration. Maybe you add some users that you want to roll it out to. You identify those users, then you monitor and observe how those users respond to that thing. Then you can ramp it up to 100%. That is one of the safety rollouts you can use Azure App Configuration for. So, like I was explaining earlier, you have a dashboard that you've created. You've changed so many things on your dashboard. You know, sometimes you just wake up, maybe you sleep and you wake up and you notice that probably your banking app, there has been a major update and everything has just changed. With Azure App Configuration, you can do that safe rollout even during the day, during business hours. Although I'm sure your risk management guys will not want you to do that during the business hours. They'll tell you to do it at off business hour. But with Azure App Configuration, you can do that safely. So you define a feature flag. You probably roll it out to a set of people. Maybe you set your targeted filter to 10%, and you've identified a list of users that you wanted to apply to. Maybe you in your application, you check the user that is calling the application. You have a particular ID of your user calling the application. You can use that to also filter users that get affected by that feature flag. And when you monitor and you see that everybody's okay, you can then wrap it up and do your major rollout to all your environment. So for now, I'm just going to quickly switch to a quick demo so that we'll see how this works properly in an Azure environment. And we'll come back and we talk more about the Azure App Configuration. So I'm just going to maximize this. Yeah. So as I was saying, how do you get to register it? How do you get to know what the app configuration is all about? So perhaps in your application, let's say, for example, I have this application, I have an API and I have a UI. I actually separated it that way so that we can see how this things changes and how it gets to affect. Usually you want your feature management to be on your backend service, which could be your API, or you could put it on your front-end service, depending on how you decide to build your application. So what I'm just doing here is I'm trying to get the app config endpoint. So I deployed this particular.
We can still see PowerPoint. Sorry, Timothy.
Oh, thought that was switching. Okay, so I'm just going to present my screen here.
Good. It's always hard to guess. It's like, oh, is someone showing something? Or it sounds like, yes, he's showing something on a screen and it's not coming up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen so I will see this. Cool. So I believe you can see my Visual Studio.
Yeah, all good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, good. So how do you get to know your app configuration endpoints to even pull your configuration from? So you can just define a variable called private app config endpoint, and you get it from the environment variable. So because I'm using an app service, right? Once I add anything to my environment variable, I can access it. The application can access it within the runtime as the name of the file. So if I just show you where this is in Azure, this is the API. Let's just go into the users group. We go to the API service. I just want to show you where the app config is and how the application is getting that value. So if I come to my environment variables, and take a while to load. Yeah, so this is the app config point. So I'm just going to show it. Don't worry, you can't really, you don't need it. So I'm just going to show you. So this is the value. This, like you remember, like I said, there is always a URL for it. There's always a DNS name for you to access your app config, and there is Azure has actually created a root domain for it called azconfig.io. This is the name of the resource in Azure. This is the root domain that Microsoft has decided to use for Azure App Service. So this app config point is what I'm accessing in my application as my app config point. Now I know that, okay, this is where I want to retrieve my value from. So I've added the package, and I'm also using the package in my application. This is the Microsoft feature management package, like I mentioned earlier. So now this configuration, sorry. So after that, yeah, now we're using the options. Like I said, we are trying to, you can use the I options to connect to it, or you use the I feature manager to connect to your Azure app config. So now we're using the options method. You can use the options.connect. I have my URI here and the credential I want to use. Now I'm using my default credential, which is the system management identity, like I said. If you don't want to use a system managed identity, you probably have something else you want to use. You can define it here. But this is the URI. I'm passing both the URI and the credential into the connect method. So this gets in here, and when there's a response that comes back, I can also define my refresh options. So in my refresh options, what key? Remember I said there's a sentinel key that you want to be using to check if there has been a change in your application, I mean, in your Azure app configuration. If there has been a change in your configuration files, there's a key you check. This is the key we're using. App configuration sentinel key. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but it's best to just use the default, which is the app configuration.sentinel. So this needs to be defined in my app configuration, which I'm just going to show you in a bit. If I go to my config, and okay, I think I haven't added that. Just did add it so that I can show you how to add it. So this, as you can see, it is not here. So meaning I'm not checking for this configuration changes. Even though everything is here, I can retrieve everything when the application starts up. But because I don't have the Sentinel key, there is no way I can be checking for update. So what we can do is just add this Sentinel key to it. Very easy. Come to this, then you come to create. You add a key value. What is the name of the key? Sentinel key. What is the value? I can call it whatever I want to call it. Basically, what the application is just going to be doing, what's the options, what the package is, the package in your application is just going to be doing is to check if this value changes. So I'm just going to date this, which is set to initial. Don't need a content type. You can decide to have a content type to it. Maybe whatever it is you're retrieving that you want to manipulate in your application. Maybe it could be keys like token or whatever it is. You can set to content type. But for me, I don't need content type. So I can just add it and it's going to save it. So what is going to happen in my application is that I'm going to retrieve all the keys, right? And I need to register something for my refresh options. So what am I registering to check for my refresh is the Sentinel key. Remember, we talked about the cache period. I'm setting my cache period here to 30 seconds, right? I can increase this to maybe whatever it is that I want to check or whatever it is that I don't want to check. That is for my configuration. Now, also for feature flag, how often do I want to check my feature flag? There's also a cache expiration interval for my feature flag, which is 5 seconds. That means I can be checking for my feature flag every 5 seconds and refreshing my application every 30 seconds. So that flexibility is one of the things that Azure App Configuration gives you. It doesn't mean whatever expiration you set is going to affect all your configuration and affect all your feature flag. You can be flexible in how you configure your cache and how you configure your refresh, or you configure your checks on either your configuration or your feature flag. So basically, that is what you can do it with this. So I've been able to register this, I've been able to set this, and yeah. So one thing that I added to this my API is that I added something to help me check for my configuration. As you can see, I'm checking for storage dot connection string, which is if I go back to Azure, you can see storage dot connection string. It's an hidden value because I don't want you to see. But if I check what it is, you should be able to come to this. It's taking a while to load. So as you can see, that is my storage connection string, right? That's because I want to retrieve something from the storage account. So I don't need to put all those things, I'd code it in my application. I don't need to do put it in my app settings.json. I can just put it here and reference it in my application. So I've been able to define my config here, which is so after I register, just after I register all the configuration, your options, and you build your services and you run your application itself, you can access it with this iConfiguration interface. So iConfiguration interface helps you to access everything you have retrieved from the Azure App Configuration, either the feature flag or either the configuration settings itself. So I can use that to get it. Now, this is my config. I can get a section. This is for me trying to get my configuration key. So I'm trying to get a section. What section am I looking for? App settings, the features. Is that there? No. That means this API is not going to work. But for the one that I just worked on, which is something you can test. So I'm trying to get this section for, what's it called? Storage.connection string. What it's going to do is going to retrieve whatever is in this value, right? And also for the container name, for the block name, and all like that. So if it's unable to get that perhaps this key is missing, I should be able to return something to my endpoint just to let the user or the API caller knows that, okay, something is missing in your configuration file, just check and all like that. But if it goes through, then I can retrieve whatever it is I want to retrieve. And also for the future, one thing I just try to add this dashboard mode, will be, which is one thing we'll be testing just to see how feature works. So I'm using the I feature manager snapshot here to retrieve my feature. There are, like I said, there are different ways you can retrieve and you can access keys, value, feature flags, config from your app configuration flag. You can use the I configuration option. You can use the I feature manager option to retrieve for feature flags. So I'm going to go into my feature flags to check for this new dashboard. If new dashboard is enabled, then I should say that, okay, new dashboard is enabled and show my users a particular type of dashboard. But if it is not enabled, I should show my users a different kind of dashboard. So basically, that is how you do the configuration in your application. And now let's just test to see how these things all work together. So I'm just going to go to my UI, which is more like a dashboard where we can see these changes quickly. So I created a UI for this. Okay, so just want it to pop up. So yeah, this is just a sample UI just for us to see what's inside. And normally it's on a classic dashboard. So now we want to test a feature flag where you can quickly switch your dashboard mode from classic to the new dashboard. So what I did was I was able to, if I go to my app config where my feature flags are, if I come to my app config and I come to my feature manager. Okay, so I added this earlier just because of what happened the last time that I tried to do something in the meeting. I mean, in the session, and for some reason, Azure didn't allow me to do it. So what I did was to add this earlier before the session. But for you to create a feature flag is so easy. You come to create options here, and you give it whatever name is you want to give it. Let's say it is called dashboard. What kind of what do you want to use this feature flag for? Do you want to use it as just a switch? So that means you want to turn it off and on quickly. Or you want to use it for safe rollout. So when you change it to safe rollout, you can see so many other configuration options. Do you want to define your audience by a group? Like, so it's going to happen is based on who is calling it or based on maybe a user group or the users themselves, depending on their email. As you can see, an example, maybe your email is coming from so place, or you have your beta testers dot your organization name.com. You can use that to override it. So that is how you do safe rollouts. Also, you have extra configuration that you could add to it. You can set conditions. An example of condition is how do you want to roll it out? When do you want to roll it out? So I can add a schedule. We'll be testing this shortly. I can add a schedule to it. Say, okay, I want this new thing to happen between now and 5 minutes just to see how users respond to it. Then I turn it off. So you have those options, you have this configuration. We'll definitely test it and also to experiment. So that's basically how you create bots. We'll create one shortly, but let's just test the new dashboard feature that I created. So as you can see right now, the new dashboard is disabled. And from my application, what I configured is that if the new dashboard is enabled, it should tell the UI to use the new dashboard. Right. So we'll turn it on and I'm going to show you how quick and how fast this can help your application. So we'll turn it on. Remember, we set our refresh options for the feature to 5 seconds. So we'll turn it on, and in 5 seconds, we'll see how the application gets to react to it. So let's turn it on, turn on the new dashboard. It's loading. Now, new dashboard has been enabled. So we're just going to test, let's say 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5, meaning it should have taken place. So if we refresh, as you can see, my new it instantly switched my application to my new dashboard. That is how convenient and how flexible it is to use Azure App Configuration. As you saw in the demo, I didn't have to restart my application. I didn't have to do anything. I just turned it on and it worked instantly. So that is how you can use Azure App Configuration to manage features. If I turn it off again, see if we refresh, let's count 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I refresh this, okay, maybe I'll faster. Let me try to refresh again. Now it's back on the classic dashboard. So that is the flexibility Azure App Configuration gives to your application. Imagine you have hundreds of services that you want this to happen to at that instance. Imagine you have to start refreshing or restarting 100 services one after the other. You don't need to do that. Just use the feature flag manager on Azure App Configuration, and it's sweet, like I usually say. So basically, that is how you can turn it on and turn it off. So what I did was just to create a what's it called? A basic feature flag. Now let's test the experimenting mode where you can schedule it. So I'm just going to delete this because I created it as a basic one already. So we need to delete it because of the name. So let's delete this feature flag and let's add it back. So we are going to use, so before it was just a switch. Now let's try the rollout feature. What is the name of the feature? Is called new dashboard. Oh, sorry, new dashboard. I use case. Yep. Now, do I want to enable it? Of course, I want to enable it. So right now we don't have so many users to test. I'm just trying to test myself. So I'm not going to use any of these features. But if you have a group of users that you want to do, you can override by groups. You can override by users. But basically, what we just want to test here is the conditioning part, which is adding a schedule to it. If I add a schedule to this, so right now my time is 7:44. So I'm just going to change to 19. Let's test for like 2 minutes. Let's set it to 1946 to 1948. Oh. Yeah, let's see how it works in 2 minutes, how it responds. Of course, this is my time, so it's just going to. Yeah. Now, do you want to enable recurrence? Do you want it to happen frequently? If you turn this on, it's going to give you more options. How often do you want it to be enabled? Just for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to leave it without turning on recurrence. And I'm just going to go to next. I'm trying to watch my time to make sure that, yeah. Okay, so I set that to 7:46. That's in the next 2 minutes. Just so if you want to enable telemetry, perhaps you want to see how applications are connecting and how these applications are retrieving these feature flags, what it is that the feature flags is doing. You can turn on telemetry, and application insight gives you much more robust metrics into monitoring how this feature flag is being retrieved, called, or prompted or changed at any point in time. So, but for now, we don't need that. So I'm just going to go next, and I'm going to create this. So this is 7:45. If I refresh, nothing should happen to my application. It should still be on the classic dashboard. But if we notice the time, by the time it gets to 7:46 up here, if we refresh it, we'll notice that yes, it's going to change. So I'm just refreshing so that you see that the time has not changed and it's still giving us the old dashboard, even though the 5-second cache period has expired. But because it doesn't reach the time you scheduled for the application, it is not going to take effect. That is another cool feature. Even if you turn it on, but if you set a schedule to it, it won't take effect until that schedule period has come. So now it's 7:46. If I refresh this, just going to give it a bit of time. Okay, so this is enabled. New dashboard, and we refresh. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why you need telemetry. Unfortunately for me, I don't have telemetry to monitor this. Just going to check once again. Oh my, time is correct. View filter details. Supposed to start 7:46 p.m. to end at 7:48 p.m. Okay, so yeah, so welcome to demos. Demos can be interesting. So I'm just going to start in incognito. Don't want to believe it was cached into my browser. Okay, so that is not happening. Perhaps something has changed. Default percentage 100 users. Yay, welcome to demos. Actually tested this before this session, and now it's also the what I do expect it to do. Okay, so that is not responding, unfortunately, but basically that is how you can schedule it. Normally that is supposed to take effect, but I'm not sure why it's not happening right now. I guess it's because of the name. The name I've used the name before for something, and it hasn't properly cleared it, whatever backend I'm sure it's using. Maybe the API is still responding with that old type of feature flag that we enable. But basically, that is how you can use it to schedule changes to your feature flag. Now, the other part that we just want to quickly touch on is the configuration changes. So if you notice on my UI, I have this sample image that I'm getting from somewhere. And unfortunately, it is not loading because it's supposed to retrieve it. If you go back into our application code, so I'm supposed to get my image from, yeah. So the response is supposed to contain the blog clients to download the email and the content type. But unfortunately, that is not responding. But then it's responding with the container name, right? Which is this. Oh, sorry, just a minute. Which is this. Now we're going to try to change something in the configuration file and see how that quick change can affect our application. So if you go to, sorry, let's go to Azure App Configuration and let's try to change something in the configuration file. So I'm just going to change my container name samples. Let's change this to, let's call it, well, let's just change it to something else different. So we'll see how that works if I apply. Now that has changed. Now that won't change if I try to kind of inspect. So you see what's going on. Let's go to our network tab, see the API. Oh, fortunately, you might not see the API response, but we are not getting anything back. If I go to my console, yeah, we're not getting anything back. That's because this is working. So now that we've changed it, it is still not going to change until, like I said, until this sentinel key changes. So if I change my sentinel key value, edit this from initial, let's call it to new, meaning it has changed. If I apply, now that my sentinel key has changed, it's just going to give it a while. Remember, our cache period is 30 seconds. So it might take a little bit of time for it to load up. But this is supposed to change because I'm not able to retrieve it anymore. The reason why the image is okay, let's just see what's wrong with the image. If I go to my storage account, let's go to the dev users group, go to storage accounts for the settings, data source continuous, and my samples folder, and the sample.ng. So this is supposed to load like a blob. But I guess that is not working properly. Oh, sorry. So, uh, then that blob is properly. corrupted. Okay, sorry. I think the reason why we're not seeing it is because I'm using Entra to load it. And for some reasons, my front end application is unable to reach this backend. So just for the sake of demo, we're going to change the access level on this to anonymous, just so we can see what's in there. Okay, I disabled it on the entire storage account. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's why it's not loading the ball. Let me just refresh this so we'll see the changes. As you can see, now it's trying to load the image. And then unfortunately, it got a response that is not found. That's to tell you. So what I just simulated there is just a bit of change in the path to the file, though it's trying to load it, but because of access, that is why you're not seeing it. But what I did is I changed the configuration settings, which meant me changing the path to the file. Now that the path to the file has changed, meaning the file does not exist, that is why we are getting 404 on our application. So that is how you can easily and quickly load configuration into your application. If I return this, if I return the configuration to the correct one, and I leave it for another 30 seconds, that means me changing the configuration to make sure that yes, it's the correct one. Then the application should not throw that error message anymore. So what did we change? We changed the name of.
I love that. I can see that really like getting used by marketing teams and a whole bunch of other things, because it's instead of giving people access to like systems
Yeah,
that they may not necessarily need access to for one thing, whether it's updating like the latest emails or latest specials on an e-commerce website or something like that, being able to use feature flags and app
yeah,
config in that way actually opens up a whole bunch of capability, because it's like, imagine if
yeah,
all the user had to do was upload something into a storage account, or that would change and then app config would pick it up. So it's pretty
yes,
cool.
yeah. Instantly, that's one thing I've configured. Instantly, it picks it up, and instantly you can see the changes. So one thing I've just done now is I actually corrected the container name to what it's supposed to be, but I'm still getting the error message on my app that, okay, I still can't reach this. Remember, like I said, once you make a configuration change, what your application does based on what we have configured here is to check if the Sentinel key has changed. Remember, we changed our Sentinel key from initial to something new called news, right? We changed it to news, but the application has cached it that, okay, the current value of my Sentinel key is news. It keeps checking, has there been a change on news? There hasn't been a change on news, even though I've changed the connection string. So for the application to understand that it needs to reload all the connection string again, I have to change my Sentinel key. So the Sentinel key is crucial to your deployment whenever you want your application to respond to um, changes. So I'm just going to update this to, can change it to something else. Let's just call it Azure, right? And apply. So right now, what the application is going to do is the application understand that the Sentinel key is saved as news. Now, in the next 30 seconds, once the application sees that the Sentinel key has changed from news to Azure, it understands that I need to reload all the configuration that I'm currently using at this point in time. So just going to wait for another 30 seconds and we should stop getting this error message. As you can see, now the error message is back. I mean, the error message is gone, meaning your configuration change went to your application instantly. So this is really crucial. For example, let's say you are using a particular API token and a particular API key to integrate with a third-party service. and for some reason something happened to that API key, perhaps it expired, or the person you're integrating to, the business you're integrating to, just gave you message that, oh, sorry, you need to change this. We're sorry. And most times when integration happen like that, you don't get the news ahead. You just have to make that switch instantly. So with the help of app configuration, you just take the new key, load it in your app configuration, refresh the sentinel key, and instantly in 30 seconds, just as we've seen, your application picks these changes and you are live again. So one of the benefits, I think from this session, I've been able to show you how you can create um, how you can manage your app configuration and how you can manage your feature flag. And one other interesting thing that I want to show you is you might be wondering, okay, I have an app settings file and I have 500 keys in there. Are you telling me that I need to start adding these keys one after the other into Azure? No, you can actually import your app settings file. So we're going to try that. I'm going to try to load a if you come to import and export here, you can load your app settings file. So perhaps I have my app configuration, just maybe you exported your app configuration from one app config and you want to load it into another app config, you can use this. Or it is a configuration file, which is app settings or JSON, or an app settings service. But let's just try to simulate the configuration file. So if I click on configuration file, I can check the format. What format is it? It's in JSON format. Okay, I browse the file. Perhaps you have it in a YAML format or you have it as a property format. Whatever format you have it, you can just browse. So I'm going to browse. And this is taking me into somewhere in my application that I don't know why it's taking me there. So I'm just going to come into this app configuration, my source. Yeah, don't worry about all the things you see. So this is a JSON file. Just going to open it. Now, while I'm importing it into Azure App Configuration, I can add some things to it. Perhaps you want to ignore a particular thing, or you want to add some feature flag, or you want to exclude some feature flag in the app config. And perhaps there's a separator that you have. You know, most times when you have like an hierarchical setting, an hierarchical kind of namespace in your setting, you always have a separator. So my separator here is this. And if you have anything else that you want to load, you want to pick some particular values, you don't want to load everything. You have so many things you can do in here. So once I do that, I can apply. And by the time it's done importing, if I go into my configuration manager, I'm going to see all the new keys and all the new files that I just added. So you can see app configuration endpoint, this is the value. App configuration sentinel, login level, this is the value. So basically this is the file that I just kind of loaded into Azure App Config. This is the file. These are the steps in there. So that is what it loaded and that is what it added into my app config. So you don't necessarily have to worry if you have a settings file that you just want to upload into Azure and you're wondering who are you going to delegate to adding those keys one after the other. You can just import it and you are good to go. Also, perhaps you have your dev things, your dev configuration that you want to load into a settings file to test on your local. You can export it to a JSON file, a configuration file, export, add your labels, and you get it in the file. You can test it on your local. So there are so many cool features with the app config that can make development easy for developers, and it's also easy for product managers to manage how they roll out their products, how they roll out their features, how they roll out releases, and so many things. So basically, that was a quick demo on how to use app config for your configuration management and for your feature flag management. So why do you need to do this? You don't need your secret in your code. You don't need to store your files, store all your ENVs in the file and keep it somewhere. You can set a refresh interval. And when you enable telemetry, you have 100% audit coverage into that. And you can see who is changing what and who is changing this, and basically manage how you roll out your configuration. So key takeaways, you can start app configuration, load your JSON file, know how to use your feature flags, and the sweet feature of it is having a dynamic refresh in Azure. So basically, that is the best offering that Azure App Configuration gives you. And I hope I've been able to pass one or two things to you that you can use in your daily life to make your development easier. And as a DevOps engineer, you can also put it in your pipeline to make deployment easy, product manager, whatever it is your role is, and you're relating with your product or your application. This is a very cool tool for you to integrate into your .NET application. Thank you very much. And if there's any survey, if there's any feedback, you can just leave your survey and your feedback. If you have questions, I'll definitely get back to you. I'll be passing it back to you, Luke.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy. Very informative. Definitely learnt a few things that, like we were talking before the session started as well. Like I played around with app config, but only very, very basic compared to what was shown today. So looking forward to playing around a bit more, seeing how I could use it in creative ways. I think the whole, like, even now, the application I've been building, like if I need to pick up a new change, I'm literally having to restart the pods to pick up the new change. And like my mind goes, actually, I should make some of those settings into application configuration. So I'm going to have a play with that and see how far I can get. But thank you again for donating your time and knowledge to us today. Yeah, feel free, anyone, to reach out and connect with Timothy. I'll put his LinkedIn in the chat, but I'm sure you can find him through social media. We'll end it here. There's no questions in the chat, but any last thoughts before we finish it off, Timothy, or all good to go?
Yeah, we're good to go. Any questions, you can just reach out to me. We had the survey, and I'll definitely get back to you to whatever it is you need with respect to our configuration. I would love to get in touch with anybody. Thank you for having me, Luke. It's been a pleasure to have this platform to share knowledge.
No, thank you for coming and sharing with us. So yeah, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your evening. And yeah, I'll start my day, but thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.